I didn't take this seriously at first until I felt it in my own body. After decades in surgery, I noticed something subtle but unsettling. Sitting was easy, but standing up felt delayed, almost disconnected. No pain, just hesitation. And I knew exactly what that meant because I had seen it countless times in older patients. What surprised me most? Walking more didn't fix it. Because the real issue wasn't movement, it was activation. So I tested something different, and a few simple chair-based movements changed everything.
Walking is often seen as the gold standard for staying active. And while it absolutely has its place, it doesn't quite do what many people assume it does. In most cases, walking helps you maintain your current level of ability. It keeps things from declining quickly, but it doesn't actively rebuild the strength that may already be slipping away. The body, especially with age, doesn't just lose muscle size, it gradually loses the efficiency of the signals that tell those muscles to fire in the first place. That means even if you're moving regularly, certain muscles, particularly the small stabilizers that support balance and coordination, may not be fully engaging. Over time, these underused muscles can become almost silent, not because they're gone, but because they're no longer being asked to work in a meaningful way. Walking alone doesn't provide the kind of targeted challenge needed to wake them back up. Real progress begins when movement becomes more intentional, when you slow things down, focus on control, and deliberately activate the muscles that are often overlooked. That's where the body starts to respond differently, not just maintaining function, but gradually restoring it. The real turning point comes when you shift your focus from effort to activation. It's easy to assume that progress means doing more, longer sessions, higher intensity, pushing harder, but the body doesn't always respond the way we expect when the focus is only on effort. What actually drives meaningful change is how effectively you engage the right muscles in the right sequence with intention behind each movement. Without that, even the hardest workouts can miss the mark. Interestingly, it doesn't take big or exhausting exercises to create this shift. Small, controlled, and precise movements can trigger rapid responses in the nervous system, essentially reminding your body how to recruit muscles that may have been underused. When that connection improves, everything else starts to fall into place. Strength begins to return, balance feels more natural, and movements become more stable. Not because you pushed harder, but because your body is finally working in a more coordinated and efficient way. Exercise 5. At first glance, ankle circles seem almost too simple to matter. But the real value of this movement isn't in the motion itself. It's in what's happening beneath the surface. The ankle is one of the most information-dense joints in your body. It's packed with sensory receptors that constantly send feedback to your brain about pressure, position, and movement. Over time, especially with less varied movement or repetitive patterns like walking in straight lines, this feedback system becomes quieter. Not gone, just less active. And when that signal weakens, your brain has less accurate information to work with, which directly affects balance, coordination, and reaction time. This is where ankle circles become powerful. When you lift your foot and begin moving it slowly through space, you're not just loosening the joint, you're reactivating that communication loop. Each controlled circle forces the brain to track position in a very precise way. It has to continuously adjust, correct, and refine the movement. That process sharpens proprioception, your internal sense of where your body is without needing to look. And that's a critical piece of stability. Because when you trip or step on an uneven surface, your body doesn't have time to think. It relies on that built-in awareness to react instantly. Now, the way you perform the movement matters more than the movement itself.
Fast, careless circles don't give your brain enough time to process what's happening. But when you slow it down, really slow it down, you increase the demand on your nervous system. The brain has to stay engaged throughout the entire range, especially at the edges where control is weakest. That's why full circles are important. Most people unconsciously avoid certain angles because they feel stiff or unfamiliar. But those gaps are exactly where instability begins. By gently exploring those edges, you're filling in missing pieces of control. Keeping the legs still is another key detail. If the knee or hip starts helping, the ankle isn't doing the work anymore, and you lose the very signal you're trying to rebuild. Isolation forces the smaller stabilizing muscles around the ankle to wake up and contribute again. These muscles don't generate big power, but they are essential for fine control. They're what keep your foot steady when your weight shifts, when you turn, or when the ground isn't perfectly even. Over time, this kind of focused activation starts to carry over into everyday movement. You may not notice it immediately, but subtle changes begin to happen. Your steps feel more controlled. You adjust more quickly without thinking. That slight hesitation or wobble becomes less frequent. And it's not because you've built massive strength. It's because you've restored clarity in the system that controls it. That's the deeper takeaway here. Stability doesn't start with force. It starts with awareness. And something as small as a slow, controlled ankle circle can begin to rebuild that foundation in a very real, measurable way. Exercise number 4 brings attention to a part of the body that's often overlooked, yet quietly essential for stability: the inner thighs. These muscles don't usually get much attention in everyday movement, but they play a key role in controlling how your body shifts from side to side. When they're underactive, balance can feel less predictable, especially during small adjustments like turning, stepping sideways, or catching yourself from a slight misstep. This is where many lateral or side-to-side falls begin, not from a lack of effort, but from a lack of coordinated support in this inner stability system. Seated knee squeezes may look simple, but they directly target this gap. When you place a pillow or folded towel between your knees and gently squeeze, you're activating a group of muscles that connect the legs to the pelvis and help stabilize your entire lower body. Instead of producing large movements, these muscles create subtle control, keeping your alignment steady as your weight shifts. By holding the squeeze for a few seconds before slowly releasing, you give your nervous system time to fully engage those fibers, rather than just brushing past them with quick repetitions. The hold is where most of the value lies. Sustained tension encourages deeper muscle recruitment and builds the kind of strength that supports stability, not just motion. Over time, this consistent activation helps those muscles become more responsive in real-life situations, especially when your body needs to correct itself quickly. Breathing normally throughout the movement is just as important. It keeps the body relaxed and prevents unnecessary strain, allowing the muscles to work efficiently without tension spreading elsewhere. What starts as a small, controlled squeeze begins to translate into something much more meaningful. Better control over lateral movement, smoother weight shifts, and a stronger sense of balance when it matters most. Exercise number 3 shifts the focus upward, but it's still very much about restoring function from the inside out. The shoulders are one of the most mobile joints in the body, yet they're also highly dependent on coordination and stability to work well. Over time, especially with less overhead movement in daily life, that coordination begins to fade. It's not just that the shoulders get weaker, they become less organized. The muscles that should guide and stabilize the joint stop working together as efficiently, which is why simple tasks like reaching up, putting on clothes, or lifting something overhead can start to feel awkward or strained. Seated arm raises with a hold directly address this. When you slowly lift your arms overhead, you're not just moving through space, You're asking multiple muscles around the shoulder and upper back to coordinate in a controlled way. The pause at the top is where things become especially valuable. In that position, your shoulders are at their most vulnerable, and your body has to rely on smaller stabilizing muscles to hold everything in place. These are the muscles that often go underused, yet they're essential for keeping the joint centered and supported.
The way you lower your arms is just as important as the lift itself. Moving down slowly forces the muscles to stay engaged while controlling the descent, rather than simply letting gravity take over. This builds a type of strength that's directly applicable to real-life movement, where control matters just as much as force. It also helps protect the joint by reinforcing proper movement patterns, reducing unnecessary strain over time.
As this becomes more comfortable, adding light resistance can gradually increase the challenge without compromising control. But the goal isn't to rush progression. It's to restore clarity in how the shoulders move and stabilize. With consistent practice, this translates into smoother, more confident reaching, better posture, and a noticeable ease in everyday tasks that once felt effortful.
Exercise number 2 brings us to one of the most important but often underdeveloped systems in the body when it comes to staying upright and stable, the outer hips. These muscles sit on the sides of your hips and play a quiet but critical role every single time you take a step. They're responsible for keeping your pelvis level and controlled as your weight shifts from one leg to the other. When they're not doing their job well, the body starts to compensate. Your steps may become less steady, your balance less reliable, and over time, the risk of falls increases, especially in side-to-side movements.
The seated hip abduction press directly targets this system in a very focused way. When you press your knees outward against resistance, whether it's your hands or a band, you're activating those outer hip muscles that are responsible for stabilizing your entire lower body. Holding that position briefly is key. It gives your brain time to fully recruit those muscles instead of just passing through the movement. Then, as you slowly return to the starting position, you're teaching those same muscles to stay engaged while controlling motion, which is exactly what they need to do during walking.
What's important to understand here is that these muscles aren't about generating big force. They're about control. Proper form matters far more than how hard you push. If the movement is rushed or sloppy, the deeper stabilizers don't engage the way they should. But when done with intention, this simple press starts to rebuild a more reliable support system around your hips.
Over time, that improvement begins to show up where it matters most, in how you move through the world. Your steps feel more balanced, your weight shifts more smoothly, and your body becomes better at correcting itself without hesitation. Stronger, more responsive hips don't just improve movement, they create a foundation that significantly reduces the likelihood of losing balance in the first place.
Exercise number 1 isn't just a starting point. It's a full-body reset that influences far more than it appears on the surface. By combining breathing with gentle spinal extension, this movement taps into multiple systems at once: how you breathe, how you hold your posture, and how your nervous system regulates tension. Most people don't realize that over time, breathing tends to become shallow and chest-dominant, especially with prolonged sitting or stress. This limits how much the diaphragm, the primary breathing muscle, actually contributes, and that has a ripple effect on posture, core stability, and even how relaxed or tense the body feels.
When you inhale deeply through your nose and allow your belly to expand, you're re-engaging the diaphragm in a more natural, efficient way. As you gently lift and open the chest at the same time, the spine begins to extend, counteracting the forward, compressed positions many people spend hours in. This isn't about forcing a posture. It's about creating space. Space for the lungs to expand, for the spine to move, and for the body to come out of that slightly collapsed state it often settles into.
The brief pause at the top gives your body a moment to register that position, but the real shift happens during the exhale. Slowing the breath as you return to neutral signals the nervous system to downregulate, to move away from a constant state of alertness and into a more calm, controlled mode. Longer exhales, in particular, have a direct calming effect, helping reduce unnecessary tension that can build up throughout the day.
Over time, this simple sequence begins to reconnect breathing with movement, which is something the body naturally does, but often forgets. Posture starts to feel more effortless rather than forced, breathing becomes deeper without conscious effort, and movements feel less restricted. It sets the tone for everything that follows, because when your breathing, spine, and nervous system are working together, the rest of the body has a much stronger foundation to build on.
What makes these movements feel effective so quickly isn't that they're intense, it's that they go straight to the root of the problem. Most traditional exercise focuses on larger, more visible muscles and repetitive motion. But these movements target something deeper, the communication pathways between your brain and your body. Over time, certain muscles don't necessarily weaken completely. They just stop receiving clear, consistent signals. They become dormant, not inactive, but underutilized and poorly coordinated.
When you perform these exercises with control and intention, you begin to reactivate those pathways. The brain starts to recognize and recruit muscles that haven't been fully engaged in a long time. This is why the response can feel surprisingly fast. It's less about building new strength from scratch and more about restoring access to strength that was already there, but not being used effectively.
Another key difference is the focus on stabilizing muscles. These are the smaller, deeper muscles responsible for balance, joint control, and subtle adjustments. They don't generate big movements, so they're often missed in standard workouts. But they're the ones that keep you steady, aligned, and responsive. By directly engaging them, these exercises improve how your body organizes movement as a whole, not just how much force it can produce. And because these movements are precise rather than exhausting, they don't require long sessions to be effective. A small amount of focused, high-quality input can create a significant functional return. The body responds quickly when the signal is clear. That's the real shift here. You're not just working harder, you're working smarter, and the results tend to reflect that almost immediately in how you move and feel. In the end, the message is simpler than most people expect. You don't need complicated routines, expensive equipment, or exhausting workouts to start seeing real change. A chair, a small amount of space, and a few intentional movements done with focus can be more effective than long sessions done without awareness, because the body doesn't just respond to effort, it responds to clarity.
When you begin to give your body the right signals, slow, controlled, purposeful activation, it recognizes them almost immediately. Muscles that felt unresponsive start to engage. Movements that once felt uncertain begin to feel more stable. And that shift can happen faster than expected, not because you're doing more, but because you're finally doing what your body actually needs. That's where the real change begins. Not when you simply go through the motions, but when each movement has intention behind it. When you stop just trying to move more and start focusing on how you move, with purpose and awareness. Because in the end, it's not about how much you do. It's about how well your body understands what you're asking it to do.